10 things every car guy must know, Fitment edition. First thing I want to talk about is the word flush. Flush is basically what almost every car guy aspires to be at some point with their fitment. So the definition of flush in the car community is how closely it is with the fender. So how flush it is with the fender, how well it sits. If you are completely flush with your fender, that means your wheel literally is perfectly straight with your fender. And this is a very nice look. It makes your car look wide. It makes the fenders look like they were fully used. It gives a very proper stance and fitment to your vehicle. It's very aggressive looking. It also helps widen out the track and make your car drive better, especially cornering. The next one we'll talk about is poke. Poke is a term used to refer to when your wheel goes past your fender, so the wheel is sticking out, it is poking out. That is the easiest way to remember it. Now, poking is really popular for off-road builds, so it does actually have a purpose as opposed to being purely cosmetic like most of the other things in this video. You'll see a lot of off-road cars and off-road trucks, off-road Jeeps, and so on and so forth. They will have lots and lots of poke, and that is normal. That is something that is good for them. Now, some street cars, as well as sports cars and even supercars, will have poke for a rather sad reason, which is usually on accident. It's when people are trying to get a wide body, but their wheels arrived first. So their wheels are going way past their current fenders because the fenders they need haven't arrived yet. The opposite usually happens more, and we'll talk about that later with the next entry. So the next entry is tuck. Tuck is how much a wheel sits inside of the fender, so it is the opposite of poke. So the way I would explain all three of these in relativity with each other is that flush is your middle ground. That's what you kind of want. Most cars from factory will actually start with tuck, and that is so they avoid kicking rock chips up at their paintwork, as well as the fact that just most companies and car dealers they're too lazy to flush out wheels. Because some cars like a Camaro Z28 usually already come flush from factory. Their fitment is perfectly fine, but a lot of cars can be fashion. It can also be something that harkens back to an older era, like Corvettes, for example. They know their audience. They're bought by a lot of older folk, and older folk prefer tuck because that's kind of a style they grew up with in the 60s. That's part of the reason why the Camaro, which is sold to younger people, doesn't have tuck. It has flush from factory, like a Z28, like I mentioned. Onto the topic of wheels, I'll touch on a word, reps. This is just a shortened word for replica wheel. This is the main word that is causing me to make this video. A lot of people were confused by this word, and a lot of people actually hated my usage of this word, and they think I'm gatekeeping against cheap wheel owners, despite the fact that I have talked multiple times that I actually am not a wheel elitist, not even close. I don't really care about wheels. So what is a replica wheel? Well, it's basically a wheel that is replicating the design of another wheel. I'm not kidding. That's all there is to it. With rep wheels and with wheels in general, there are only so many spoke designs you can make. Like, how many different 5 spokes can you come with until every other 5 spoke starts to look like another 5 spoke? Same with 6 spokes, same with 10 spokes, and so on and so forth. I can't fault you or hate you for buying a replica wheel because there's a chance you did it purely on accident because you didn't know the brand for it, and I do not blame you at all. There is a master list of what is a rep brand and what is a real wheel brand, but get this, sometimes the real wheel manufacturers will steal designs from other manufacturers, meaning that real wheel brands sometimes make reps. And get this, sometimes rep manufacturers after several years finally get enough money to make their own lineup, so they start to make real wheels that are original designs that don't have anything they're copying off of. So is this getting confusing yet? Are you starting to see why I'm not a wheel elitist? Because I think people make it way too big of a deal when it's this ridiculously complicated for someone who's not this dedicated to it. I'm not against this term existing, by the way, because I still think it's funny, but more so, it's still a good nomination to describe something. Like if I see a replica wheel, it's just quick and easy to say rep. The next thing we'll talk about again has to do with wheels, and this is offset. Well, this whole video has to do with wheels essentially because it's fitment, but offset is another very important thing because this is a very expensive mistake if you do it wrong. Offset will describe how much a wheel sits relative to your car's fitment. Whenever you're buying wheels, make sure to look up your current stock offset. Taking that number, the higher you go means the more it's going to tuck in, so we already talked about what tucking means. The lower that number is compared to your stock number, that means the wheel will move out further. I'm going to use my own car as an example here. So my car's stock offset for the rear wheels were 59 millimeters. My current one is 41. So I reduced my offset when I bought new wheels for it. Therefore, my wheels went outwards. If I wanted to get ones that tucked in more, I will increase the offset. Now, my car actually has a really high number. There are some people where they're in the lower like 20s and 30s as their stock, and they will actually go to the negatives before they even achieve flush. And again, cars that have a lot of poke, like off-road vehicles, will already be in the negatives alternatives. Make sure you look up your car, find the number for its stock offset, and then when you buy new wheels for it, just simply look higher or lower. Higher will go in more, lower will go out more, just depending on what you want. But let's say you're someone who's already messed it up. Maybe you bought wheels that tucked way more than you expected. You just bought them because they looked cool and you didn't do enough research, or you didn't know what the word offset meant. Spacers. Spacers is another term we're gonna move on to, and this is a cheap way to move your wheels out of the fender well. So spacers, unfortunately, can only be used to achieve flush and poke. It does not accomplish tuck because you're adding something with spacers, not taking something away. So spacers can only make your current wheel go out more. It cannot make your current wheel tuck in more. You're gonna have to change whole wheels and get a different spoke design if you want it to tuck in more with offset. Now, the point of spacers, like I said, is usually just cosmetic. Sometimes it does have some track purpose to get a wider track. Usually you want to still be within the noise. When you're buying spacers, anything under 10 millimeters, as long as it's hub centric, is a very safe option. You can also buy extended lug nuts or extended so on and so forth. You can also buy bolt-on spacers. Again, it will depend on your situation, but if you keep it small relative and you do everything right, and as long as, like I said, it's hub centric, it's a really safe buy. It's a really cheap way to fix your fitment really quickly, especially if you like your current wheel. This also works for stock wheels. Let's say you're just like, yo, I like the way my stock wheels look. I'm just gonna lower my car, but I just want my wheels to be a bit more flushed out. You can just throw on some 10 millimeter spacers and you can have a nice day. It's gonna save you a heck of a lot more money than dumping thousands upon thousands on buying new wheels. Now, the reason I've been talking about small ones is I will address larger spacers. Larger spacers do come with additional maintenance. One is that they're gonna cause more stress on your wheel bearings. Another one that you worry about is that if it's not hub centric, it may actually snap on the bolts. It may snap your lugs, and don't be stupid. Don't buy something cheap. Don't buy something weak. You're driving on these. You're essentially making what was originally one moving part, your wheel against your hub, to now two separate parts. And with anything in life, when you do that, you're adding a new stress point, so there's another chance of failure. If you are gonna have to run bigger spacers, it's okay to do it as a transition or temporary solution, especially to run bigger brakes. Stance. This is a very controversial term. You probably have a general gist of what it means, even if you're a non-car guy, because that's how often this is thrown out. So stance in technicality describes camber. So camber in this case, refers to negative camber. It's when the wheels start to cave outwards. That is what's referred to as a stanced car. I used to wonder why cars were stanced. It wasn't until around 2019, and I lived more and more in Atlanta, did I learn why people stanced. This is done to reduce as much ground clearance as possible, while also making the vehicle look wider. It is purely cosmetic. Most of it, anything beyond like -5, usually just is pure style. It's pure style. You have some people going as crazy as -20. It's insane. So I'm gonna explain why it reduces ground clearance. So let's say you take a car, it's just stock wheels, stock tires, stock suspension. If you buy lowering springs and slam it all the way down to the point you've destroyed all wheel gap and you're sitting on your tire, you'll notice you still have ground gap or ground clearance. And some people, most people rather, are just content with eliminating wheel gap, if not even that. I prefer at least 1 or 2 fingers. That way when I go over a bump, my tire doesn't completely rub up against my fender lining and completely destroy the fender region. But other people are like, this isn't good enough. Not only do I want to get rid of wheel gap, I want to get rid of ground gap. So they will slam the car even further by caving their wheels outwards, hence the negative camber and hence stance culture. I finally understand. While I will never do it myself or ever even come close to thinking it looks good, at least I see why people do it. I used to wonder what it was for, but now I'm like, oh, they're literally trying to get the bodywork of their car. They're trying to lay frame. Now, the next thing we'll talk about has somewhat to do with stance, and that is stretch. Stretch refers to your tires, so this is the first time we'll talk about tires in this video. Stretching a tire is done to clear your fender. For example, it's when you take a tire that is smaller than the intended wheel it's supposed to go on, usually by 10, 20, even 30 millimeters or more, you are wrapping it around so this area, the shoulder of the tire, is curved more. That way it will curve more and actually clear and not rub against your fender or fender. Yeah, right, these guys have fender liner. Most of them don't, but it doesn't rub against their fender. So that is why people stretch tires. It is done with conjunction for stance, because when wheels start to camber and cave inwards and then also tuck upwards into the fender area, you do need to start to stretch the tires So a lot of the terms that I've used this video, about 5 or so, I have used them in previous videos, but I never actually explained them, so it's still a lot of new content here. This next term I'm about to talk about is a term that I actually haven't even talked about, much less explained. There just wasn't an opportunity. Whatever, we're gonna get to it, so stop wasting your time. Pulling or rolling your fender. I'm actually gonna group these words together as one for this entry, though they do mean different things. So rolling a fender usually has to do with the inner lip, basically the back side of the fender, and this is something that you want to do to essentially allow more clearance. Again, this is something done with conjunction for tucking, for stance, for getting larger and wider wheels, and so on and so forth. Pulling a fender usually involves literally pulling it, so this will cause a physical exterior change. Now, pulling a fender is you're basically using force to flare it out. There are lots of tools that you can use to roll a fender, as well as lots of tools you can use to pull fenders. Some broke boys even straight up just heat up and just plunger out their fenders to get it pulled, and the results will vary depending on what you're going for. Of course, if you want a really nice looking wide body, the best result is to just buy a proper wide body or cut your fenders and get a fender flare kit. The main reason I've never really had an excuse to use these terms is A, I'm not really that indoctrinated into stance culture. B, I don't really care much for fitment literally until recently. C, alright, I admit it, I'm a fiberglass peasant, that's why. I've never had a metal fender car, and as a fiberglass, as a plastic fantastic American peasant, I've never had the ability to even do either of these. That is the main reason I've never spoken about it, is I've never had to learn about it, and I've never had an opportunity to ever have it be useful to me. Alright, you got me, that's why I haven't talked about it. Anyways, that is gonna be it for this edition of 10 Things Every Car Guy Must Know. What other part of car culture do you want me to explain and talk about? Make sure to comment it down below. Other than that, thanks for watching, and if you like cars and car content, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like this video to help me in the algorithm, and until then, see y'all next time. Belated Angel out.